The story of Pantheon starts with a man named Atreus, who was born into the Targonian warrior tribe known as the Rakor. Atreus was never particularly strong or fast among the Rakor, but he was incredibly resilient, ever being the last one to leave the training grounds in the evening. His unrelenting defiance also earned him the respect of Pylus, a promising young warrior, and the two of them became close friends and brothers in arms. However, when the tribe was attacked by barbarians seeking to conquer their lands, they quickly grew dissatisfied. The Solari elders refused to send out the Rahurak to seek out and destroy their enemies, instead seeking to protect their homes in case of another attack, a tactic the two of them viewed as weak and passive. Atreus and Pylus had grown up hearing the stories of great heroes who ascended to the peak of Mount Targon and came back as powerful aspects, and decided to make the climb themselves in an attempt to be strong enough to protect their village on their own. After weeks of horrid climbing, Pylus and Atreus reached the peak, only to find nothing. In the unrelenting cold of the peak, Pylus perished, and only then the heavens opened. Months later, a god warrior who wore Atreus' face returned, the Pantheon, aspect of war. However, the Pantheon had seen a warrior who only knew defeat at the peak, someone he did not deem worthy, and had instead taken over his body, erasing his memories and personality, erasing Atreus. The Pantheon sought out the true threat that had pushed the barbarians from their homeland and therefore had motivated them to attack, a Darkin named Aatrox. However, the Pantheon did not win that fight, and Aatrox cut him down, erasing the constellation of the Pantheon in the night sky. As the aspect faded, Atreus, the man he had considered weak, endured. Having been left to die by Aatrox, Atreus did the one thing he had ever been good at. He got back up. Wounded and bleeding, he returned to the farm of Eula, Pylus' wife and now widow, and was nursed back to health. In the following time, Atreus realized that the barbarians were not their enemies. They also were simply mortals who fought to survive because they had been forced to do so by a higher power. And Aatrox was not the only enemy. The aspects that refused to defend them were no better. Fueled by his own mortal will, the powers of the dead aspect once again reignited Atreus' spear, as he swore to take a stand between mortals and aspects, ascended, demons, and any who wields power so great it can only destroy. Forsaking his own name, he became the new Pantheon. For with the divine Pantheon gone, war must be reborn in man. And with that, hello there, and welcome to the first episode of Lore Tangent featuring Pantheon, the Unbreakable Spear. This is the series where we'll look at one of the champions in League of Legends, review their lore and their character, looking at their biography and all of the stories they are featured in, and figure out what makes them good. Or, well, not so good. Before we talk about Pantheon, we kind of have to talk about Targon first though. Targon as a region is defined as a threshold between the mortal and the celestial, and this can be seen in pretty much every aspect of the region. The people of Targon, for example, the Solari, the Rakor, the Lunari, and even the other tribes are characterized as extremely religious, sometimes even bordering fanatic, emphasizing their connection to the divine. The most obvious example, however, is that Targon serves as a literal gateway between the mortal and the celestial realm, with the shining celestial city of Targon Prime supposedly placed directly above its peak. Using a mountain as such a gateway is very clever, as it evokes religious images of being close to the heavens that have been around since centuries. It reminds us of mountaintop monasteries or things like the Tower of Babel. This is also where the aspects come in. If a mortal climbs Mount Targon, an extremely physically and spiritually challenging endeavor, and are seen as worthy in the eyes of the Celestials, they become an aspect, a physical representation of the will of the Celestial they are now bound to. They are the perfect balance between mortal and celestial. Some of them, like Tarek and Zoe, are so in unison and harmony with their Celestial that they probably lean more towards the Celestial, being a perfect embodiment of that divine entity in the mortal realm. Others retain a lot of their mortal struggles and conflicts, like Diana and Leona, who keep their rivalry alive even after their ascension. The aspects are an incredibly cool part of the world building of Runeterra, but it's very easy for them to become monotone and boring even if they represent different concepts, because they essentially all tell the same story. Mortal climbs Mount Targon, proves themselves by overcoming great obstacles, is rewarded by being turned into an aspect, and now realizes the will of the Celestial in Runeterra. It's very simple in concept, but simple concepts like this one can become incredibly interesting once you add subversion into the story, and Pantheon is a phenomenal subversion of the other aspects. When he was still a mortal named Atreus, he wasn't a particularly strong warrior or anything. The only thing that set him apart from the others was his resilience and unwillingness to give up. When you knocked him down, it was simply a matter of time before he got up again. This is also what made him survive at the top of Mount Targon, where Pylus perished, but he endured. With his unwavering resilience, he proved himself worthy. However, when the true Pantheon saw him, he saw no more than a warrior that wasn't particularly good at fighting, completely missing the one thing that made Atreus able to prove himself worthy in the first place, which already establishes an imperfection in the Celestials. This is only further established when the Pantheon dies in the battle with Aatrox, falling to a superior foe. But while the Celestial dies, the mortal, Atreus, survives. And he lives on because of the one thing that made him special, his resilience, a thing that not even the Pantheon had. The way this one characteristic of Atreus is used throughout the story is a very clever way to explain why Atreus thinks that he and the other mortals are superior to the Celestials, because in a way he undeniably proved himself superior to the Celestial that inhabited his body. And keep in mind that this is the central characteristic of this character because it'll come up again later. His bio also already establishes a really cool character connection to Aatrox, a rivalry that works extremely well because these characters contrast each other so well thematically. In a way, they are pretty similar. Both of them fallen god warriors, with Aatrox formerly being one of the Ascended of Shurima who then fell after the death of Azir and became a Darkin, while Atreus, of course, used to be an aspect, but the Celestial he was connected to was killed. While Aatrox is completely engulfed in despair by his fall, despising his fallen form and longing for the glory of the past, Pantheon is very different. He sees his fall as an opportunity, actually as a triumph even. A triumph over the Celestial. He doesn't let himself be overwhelmed by despair, but instead faces the world with newfound determination. We should also mention that he does have connections to non-champion characters as well. Pylus, his brother in arms that died at the peak of Mount Targon, is a relationship that haunts Atreus to this day, which also makes his relationship with his wife Eula, who's also one of his support cards in Legends of Runeterra, let's say, emotionally loaded. This will also be on full display in one of the stories we're gonna have a look at soon. Overall, I think Pantheon's bio already places him firmly in Targon, because he fits extremely well into already established storylines, while bringing a lot of new aspects to the table and also subverting the expectations we have for Targonian characters. Now, there are many characters in League that have pretty interesting biographies that I still wouldn't consider incredibly good characters, simply because they are merely an interesting concept but are never really used in an interesting way in practice. That's not necessarily because they don't translate well into practice, but mostly simply because they are released and then forgotten about, never getting any significant lore to speak of. So, to truly evaluate Pantheon, we're gonna have to take a look. While Pantheon's appearances aren't exactly numerous, he does have more than many other champions. He did appear in the Call cinematic, but I don't think that really told us a significant story about him, so I guess that's just a nice bonus. Other than that, Pantheon does appear in Legends of Runeterra, and his cards there decently build upon his lore, giving us some art for Eula and also telling the story about how Pantheon and some of his comrades managed to kill a demon. Major demons in Runeterra all represent some kind of emotion, and Camphor, the demon that appears in Legends of Runeterra, is the demon of doubt. A very fitting choice considering that Pantheon consistently triumphs over doubt himself, and therefore also triumphs over the demon that represents that emotion. The main thing I want to have a look at here though are his two short stories, called For Those Who Have Fallen and In Battle Broken. So let's have a look, shall we? But still, I can feel my scar throbbing with pain, reminding me I am alive and of every moment that brought me here. My brother in arms, Pylus, telling me to stop getting blood on his victory. The barbarian raid each of us near death, collapsing upon Targon's pinnacle. The darkened blade cutting through death to awaken me again. Empyrean wheat clinging to the mountain. The mud on my hands as I put down the plow and pick up the spear. All of that would be nothing without the woman taking up her shield, knowing that she would not survive, but that she would fight. Her power, her sacrifice, so much greater than that of the stars, so much greater than mine and the weapons of the aspect that have kept me safe. It will not be in vain. The first thing we should point out about For Those Who Have Fallen is that it is Pantheon's color story that was released alongside his rework. Color stories are meant to give us a glimpse into the life of a champion. They most of the time do not reveal anything new, but instead show us what we already know about the champion in practice. And, well, For Those Who Have Fallen does a great job at exactly that. The story shows Pantheon in the ruins of Nerimazeth and Shurima, joining a cohort of Solari Rahurak soldiers in their fight against the remnant of the Ascended of ancient Shurima. While I don't believe it was technically confirmed, the creature they are fighting is very likely to be Zareth, as it is described as unlike any Ascended Pantheon has ever seen, a shattered god, and I'm not sure what other type of Ascended that should refer to. Even the Bakai do not look anything like that, as we can see in Legends of Runeterra. The battle is quite one-sided when Pantheon arrives, with the Solari warriors being torn apart by the magic of their opponent. Even Pantheon, wielding the power of an aspect, is not able to withstand its blasts. When he is down on the ground, almost defeated, he is saved by one of the warriors who, so far, have only stood back and watched him fight. Her sacrifice makes him regain his strength, find his determination once again, and he is able to not only get up and fight again once more, but also to inspire the other warriors to fight alongside him. The story really establishes his character quite well. The Solari first believe him to be an aspect, which means that they meet him with equal fear and respect, and they think he is going to fight their battle for them. They think they are merely mortals in a fight between god warriors, which means they think they are unable to actually accomplish anything, even if they were to fight. When Pantheon fails, however, they start to see that he is also a mortal, just like them, which gives them the determination to fight alongside him, as they now see what a mortal is capable of. I also really like that the story shows that Atreus, despite now having gained the strength of an aspect, still isn't a particularly strong warrior. He fails to defeat the Ascended, doesn't even come close to it. It's once again his endurance and unwillingness to give up that makes him strong and that makes him inspire the other warriors, and that's some character consistency I can appreciate. Another small detail I really like about the story is the fact that the warriors are Solari. Atreus wasn't exactly fond of the Solarian life, and especially isn't now of the aspect of the sun, but he still helps them. It establishes that he still views them as worth saving, as worth fighting alongside with, even though he might not agree with everything they stand for. As long as they are mortal and as long as they fight on the same battlefield, they are his brothers and sisters in arms. That was a thing that his biography kind of left open, and I think it's nice to see that it's established because I think it makes Pantheon a lot more heroic. And it also shows once again that he is greater than the aspect of war, because I don't think the original Pantheon would have bothered saving his enemies. As I said, the story isn't exactly groundbreaking, but it certainly does what it's supposed to, and I can appreciate that. I think where Pantheon really gets interesting though, is in his newest story, in Battle Broken. "I need you to tell me it's okay to give up," he replied. Eula felt suddenly cold. "What?" "There is too much evil in the world. You and I have both seen it. I've fought it for so long I can't remember what came before. But I'm tired. I'm so damn tired, Eula. How can mortals hope to win out against undying kings or fallen god warriors? The aspects and their slaves, demons from the spirit realm. Runeterra is becoming their playground." I thought all I needed to do was keep getting back up, no matter what. But if I can be made an enemy too, then simply being able to endure is no longer enough. As we discussed earlier, Pantheon's primary character strength that made him special in life, made him worthy to become an aspect, and made him surpass the celestial that inhabited his body is his endurance and unwillingness to give up. It's the thing that makes him a hero. When you want to break such a character, you can do it by going for their weaknesses, yes, but when their strengths are so clearly defined, it's often more powerful if you take those strengths away. And that's exactly what In Battle Broken does, and what makes it such a powerful story. Before we go any deeper than that though, we have to address the elephant in the room. If you're already familiar with the story, you might know it immediately follows the events of Sentinels of Light, an event that wasn't exactly received well. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I'm saying that the whole Targon arc, and especially Ruined Pantheon, were two of the many things that players were unsatisfied with. Riot could have just ignored that this happened and went on with Pantheon's story as if it had never happened. But they didn't. Following up on that story was a pretty brave move, but it also had quite a bit of potential. If this story was good, and they did the same for the other characters, then the Ruination could retroactively still become an important and good piece of League of Legends lore. So, does In Battle Broken manage to do that? Well, I've already told you I think it's a dang good story, but see for yourself. The story starts with Atreus returning to Eula's farm after the events of the Ruination. Since Atreus is an aspect and therefore doesn't age, he doesn't realize that he is returning to a 68-year-old Eula, who now lives with two orphans in the home she once shared with Pylus, her husband, and the home that she once before helped nurse Atreus back to health in after the Pantheon had died. However, this time, Atreus doesn't come to her with just physical wounds. It had pained her to see him physically broken, but Eula knew now that the wounds he must have recently suffered ran far deeper than his flesh. And that hurt her more than anything else she could imagine. Those mental wounds Atreus suffered were of course caused by Viego controlling him and using him against his own people. The story mentions the parallel to what already happened to Atreus, being controlled by the Pantheon all those years ago itself, and that parallel is very clever. The fact that Atreus wasn't just controlled by another much more powerful being once, but twice is gruesome. But this time he wasn't able to surpass his controller, but was rather freed when Viego was defeated a whole continent away. This time was different because this time he was truly powerless. And that's really why I chose the quote at the beginning. There's no foe that would have been able to break Atreus' will, but if he himself can become an enemy, his endurance is not enough. You might say it's out of character for Atreus to give up since his unwillingness to do so was such a big part of his character, but actually I think it works extremely well. It makes sense even a character as resilient as him would have something that is able to break him. And being controlled, especially with the trauma he already has from the Pantheon that controlled him, makes perfect sense as being the one thing to do that. But really, that's not the only reason I like this story. It doesn't just give Atreus some further character development, but also flashes out Eula. When Atreus asks her for one thing and one thing only, her permission to give up, she refuses. Because while Atreus' spirit may be broken, hers isn't, and she refuses to stop believing in Atreus. She reminds him of Pylus, of the things she has lost on her way and of the things that Atreus has lost on his. She reminds him of what Atreus used to fight for, both for the people still alive like Eula and the Rakor, and for those who have fallen. While that quote isn't directly in the story, it still feels like a pretty overt reference to the story we looked at previously, which works extremely well as a reminder for Atreus. This story firmly establishes that it isn't just Atreus' will that inspires others, but also the people around him that inspire him in turn. Eula picks Atreus up when all he can see is defeat, doing exactly the same thing that Atreus has done for the warriors that fought alongside him so many times. It honestly makes Atreus a lot more human and a lot more relatable, which makes a lot of sense for a character that is all about being human in a superhuman world. And the message that even the most resilient people cannot shoulder everything on their own and need the support of others to succeed is honestly very healthy, and it's probably going to resonate with more people than just me. I think I've made it fairly obvious that I love this story with all of my heart, and it may be one of my favorites on Universe right now. However, the story does leave one thing open. Pantheon leaves, but it's not explicitly stated that he has found his determination again. I mean, it's likely that he didn't just go out there and die, especially since we still see him in the Call cinematic fighting Leona, and most importantly, using the powers of an aspect again that he had lost in this story. However, I'd still like to take a look at... Now, this is the segment of this show where we'll look at ways this champion could be improved in the future, or simply what other stories they could appear in the future. For champions that don't have a lot of lore, they probably will have much shorter sections on their biography and their appearances, if they even have any, but this will be the segment where we'll try to come up with ways in which their potential might still be realized. However, if you've watched this video this far, it probably won't be all that surprising to you if I tell you that I think Pantheon is a champion with a very solidly executed story. He fits extremely well into Targon without being unoriginal or redundant, has a very strong and clearly defined character concept, and that concept is brought alive really well with his color story and then subverted and pushed forward in his newest story. If I did have to criticize anything about Pantheon, or at least if I had to come up with something that I feel like should really be explored in the future, I think it's madness that the only times we've seen Pantheon interact with another aspect are the Sentinels of Light event that wasn't exactly well known for its storytelling, and the Call cinematic, which, well, doesn't have any dialogue. It was nice to see Pantheon and Leona fight and all, but I think we can do better than that, especially considering that that meeting might be very interesting depending on which aspect Pantheon meets. Leona seems like the obvious antagonistic choice here since Pantheon already has a personal grudge against the Solari, so that story would probably write itself. However, I think Leona already has a dedicated rival in Diana, and I think adding Pantheon to her story doesn't really do much for her, even though it adds a lot for Pantheon. On the other hand though, imagine how a meeting with an aspect like Diana or Tarek might go. Pantheon might see Diana as just another Leona at first, but when he learns that she also is just fighting to protect her people, her mortal people, from the persecution of the Solari, his views on her might change. Especially if they end up fighting alongside each other against the Solari, that could easily forge a bond in combat between the two of them that Pantheon is so well known for. I also think he wouldn't be intruding on Diana's story as much as on Leona's, since this feels like it could be just a one-time meeting instead of an ongoing connection. Tarek as well is an interesting choice, especially since he also kind of lacks connections to other champions in Targon. Tarek and Pantheon contrast each other so much, being the aspect of the Protector and of War respectively, so that would make their meeting interesting in of itself. However, since Tarek is so empathetic and so objectively helping the world, I think he might be a good candidate to challenge Pantheon's views that all supernatural things are evil. Actually, I think that's something to be said for both of these options. A meeting with an aspect that isn't antagonistic towards Pantheon might help him adjust his kind of black and white morality, that everyone who is mortal is good and everyone who isn't is bad. That might give him some really cool character development, and it would be interesting to see how he handles that revelation and how it might change his view on other characters. That could, of course, also be achieved the other way around, not by making him aware that not all supernatural things are evil, but rather not all mortals are good. However, there's no real Targonian, or even Shuriman since that's close by, champion that I could think of that is solely mortal but still so evil that they might cause such a development in Pantheon. It could work with a non-champion character though. For example, he might once again, all those years later, try to help some Solari like he did in the Scala story, but since the Solari have been pushed towards extremism over the years, they might actually stab him in the back. That would be a pretty interesting parallel to his Color story. Another thing is that he could once again meet Aatrox, since I think that is a very strong rivalry to explore, but that might be a thing for something bigger with a little more build-up, maybe even a cinematic. I think it might be enough for me to scratch that itch for more Pantheon and Aatrox if Aatrox was simply added to Legends of Runeterra and we could see their interactions there as well as the interactions between their respective followers actually. I just would really like to see them spitting insults at each other some more. I could really go on suggesting stories for Pantheon, but I think that just shows how much potential this champion has, and how his story definitely isn't finished yet. I think having him meet an aspect is the primary thing I would really like to see in the future. However, if whatever story comes next comes even close to In Battle Broken, which was really the story that made Pantheon one of my favorite characters in the game, I have no doubt I will absolutely adore it. No matter what happens, I probably will never be unhappy with more Pantheon content. Hey, thank you very much for watching this first episode of Lore Tangent. I would really like to hear your feedback on this, what you think of the show as a whole, which parts you enjoyed and which parts perhaps not so much. I definitely plan on making this a series, but I'll have to see how much you guys enjoy it before that becomes final. Anyway, as always, I would appreciate it if you could leave a like, comment or subscription to tell YouTube I have worth as a person. I hope you'll be as resilient as the Unbreakable Spear in your travels, and stay delusional.